Hello, people. Welcome to another edition of A Dose of Drew. And tonight on Friday Night Knives, we have the Bestech Slasher. This is a nice new sheep's foot sort of cleaver style entry from Bestech. This one's in the blue denim micarta. It's got a black coated D2. Is that D2? I believe, yeah, it's not K110, it's D2. Straight out D2. Not bad. In that cleaver shape. High saber grind. You can see right there a little bit of a swedge. But let's get into a couple of other things. First things first, the standardized measurements here. It's a fairly full size there. 8 inches overall, tip to tail, and tip to scale is just under 3.5 or right about there. Fairly good size blade. All right, so it's not too bad. In fact, get some of the referentials here. The Spider sandwich with the paramilitary 2. As you can see, it's much closer to the Para 2 in hand space. Right, you got a fair amount of usable hand space on the Slasher here, and of course the Para 3, where again it actually has a bit more hand space than the Para 3, which is especially the choils. The paramilitary and the Para 3 have a ton of hand space, even if their blade lengths aren't exactly the largest. There's lots of ways to manipulate that within the hand, which is what you generally use a knife with. All right, and it's just a blur, as you can see. Very similar in size, but even a little bit more hand space. And not just any leak, but a random leak. And again, fairly full size. Right now, I think the blur best kind of like it sits right almost entirely within each other's, right, within each other's silhouette. They're really, really close when it comes to size. So that's will give you a good indication as far as that goes if you know the blur. If you don't, here is the Benchmade Bug Out. Right, nice size. Again, a little bit more hand space, no beak on the back. Gives you that little bit of extra finger room. And the Civivi Elementum, as you can see, bit larger, definitely in the full size range, which is not bad. You know, it's up there. But here it is compared to my Wienar. And though it may be larger than my Wienar, do you really want a Slasher? I mean, really, come on. All right, so let's get into some of the rest here when it comes to the design. One of the first things first, this is a full-size knife. And though it has skeletonizing, I don't know if I can get that to where it'll see here. Even though it has skeletonizing in it, it's still not the lightest. It's a full 4 ounces, right? It's still a full-size, heavy-duty knife, right? A little over 4 ounces. That's got its own thing, but where it really comes into shine is something I'll get into in a minute. Oh, 0. Let's see if it stays that way. There we go. All right, 5 thousandths isn't much, but for some of our measurements, it is. So look at that, 136 thousandths, right? In blade stock, you can measure it in a couple other places, 134 thousandths. And so we got a little bit of variation. Where this really comes into its own is what Bestech did behind the edge for this thing. Let's see if I can get that. 12.5 to 13 thousandths is or around 13.5. It's a pretty repeatable measurement. Just to give you guys an idea. Slid off. It's fairly repeatable to get right behind the edge. 14. This is even harder. It's ridiculous. My point being, it's ridiculously thin behind the edge, and it gets a little bit thicker by the front, but not much. It's around 13. A repeatable measurement I got is between 13 and 14 thousandths behind the edge. It takes a really long time to do it on camera and get that right on that tiny. Then you can see how thin the secondary bevel is. That's not because they did a really high angle. That's because it's really thin behind the edge. Makes it incredibly slicey, right? It does fairly good, especially with that cleaver bit. if I had better paper that I could, right? It does a fairly good slice. And that neutral handle with a little bit of kind of this, a little bit, it's pretty straight across the back there. There's a little bit of kick down, though this kind of is a strange angle where it almost angles down. So there's kind of a hump right there. Fits nicely in the palm. Does the saber grip fantastically. This is really, really good on the saber grip. There's a space to choke up. It's not really, you know, there's the danger. You don't want to do anything heavy. Excuse me. You don't want to do anything heavy while you're at that. Also, the scoring. Get my full surface here. If you're going to do the scoring, it keeps your fingers off at the curve, the belly of the blade, as well as just the overall angle. Really keeps your fingers up off the surface where you can get a lot of scoring area on that tip, which is nice to have. And that cleaver blade is just such a fantastic EDC. This sheep's foot, reverse Tonto cleaver, there's lots of different names for it. But this style with a little bit of belly and a sort of truncated tip is just such a ridiculously good EDC blade shape. It does so much so well for the real everyday, right? The package piercer, you have a lot of piercing control right at that tip where it gets in there, so you can just get the tip in. So you get the package piercer, the shrink wrap or bubble wrap slicer, right? It's really, really good. You can get lots of control. You can choke up and get very light work or make precision work possible. It is a cardboard carver. You get back in that saber grip, and there's a lot of blade that's thin behind the edge with a little bit of belly that will just, and D2 has pretty good edge retention, so it will just eat up cardboard. Very good. And it is an envelope eviscerator extraordinaire. You get it in the reverse grip, catch it on an envelope, and just, it's a nice, easy motion, especially with that thinness behind the edge, to just slice right down. It does all those and tasks and more quite well. So yeah, the design is fantastic in that particular part. The aesthetics, I like it. It's a simple design in the sense that it's classic. You got kind of a squared off. It's not overly fancy, but as far as just a good, simple design, it's there. There's little bits of, it's not, well, actually, you might call that fully contoured. It's flat right here, but there's so much contouring. Let's see if I can see that. There's literally so much contouring to the edges, like the back bevel and stuff, that it almost makes the whole thing contoured. Even on the front, better pull the blade back so better see it. Right, yeah, there's a flat spot, but that's almost contoured. There's so much beveling that it almost contours the entire thing. So it may not say contoured, but it's effectively a contoured handle while still being quite blocky and having inset. I don't know if that's fully, having inset liners there. Really nice. I think it looks like a tool knife. This looks like a knife for tool purposes. It's not quite as stabby pokey, but it definitely has that slicey cut, sort of utility knife vibe along with the cleaver, which I don't mind at all. I think that's really nice for an everyday carry type of knife. I think it does a lot of good stuff for it. And it reflects kind of what a lot of people use their knives for, right? They use them as tools. The mechanics work fantastic. Bestech lock. They've got their crossbar lock down. It's really, really nice. It's literally just so easy to use in every way. It's a little bit light on the crossbar, but that's just, you can flick it just a little bit light without even using the bar, right? If you have a good grip on it, you can sort of flick out the blade. That's not necessarily a bad thing, just a noticeable bit on the mechanics. But it's really quite good. Even with the coated blade, have not had a lot of buildup. Been using this quite a bit, and a lot of times you'll get some of the buildup from the coat getting worn down by the bearings. Have not had that problem at all. Has had no stick buildup or anything like that. So that's something of note, where this one is tuned to be able to absorb some of that, which is kind of nice in certain ways. And really, the noteworthy points on this is that it's an inexpensive buy. I really, really hate to call it anything else, but It's not a cheap. This is absolutely a budget knife. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's got D2. It's got all of the standard budget knife capabilities. Reversible clip, crossbar lock, ambidextrous thumb studs. Right? What can you say besides? Yeah, it does it well. On base, I mean, that's just noteworthy points. We're talking about something that's like 60 something dollars. I think it may be $65 somewhere in there, depending upon which retailer you go. Given inflation, that's about the knives that used to cost around the $50 to $55 mark. We've got about a 20% increase in prices all the way around. Anyone who can't figure out the math on that, if you have about 8% inflation on everything, it adds up. So it is what it is. But that's still a pretty bargain price for a very capable and well-made knife. And its intended purpose as an EDC carry, I don't think are even slightly something to contest. It has that sheep's foot / cleaver style blade with the swedge designed to make its way through just about everything. It's in D2 for high edge retention. This is probably not a food prep knife, though you could use it in a pinch with the coating. But yeah, everyday slicing, and I mean, it really puts it in the name with the slasher, where it has really good saber grip, design and touches. The saber grip feels really good on this knife, and the other ones are put there as we know that you need to use the knife in other ways, but it really has a great feel in that saber grip. It's really obviously the main grip of the knife, while other grips work very well. And that's really ties to its intended purpose. This is an EDC knife where edge retention for the price is where it's at. You have a good price, great execution, high quality, and a blade steel that's coated for rust, for corrosion inhibitants, and prioritizes D2, so it prioritizes a little bit of that edge retention over the toughness and corrosion resistance. And that's not a bad bit, right? That's an EDC blade for what a lot of people do. If you live in a place where there's a lot of, say, salt water, you're on an island or someplace that has a lot of moisture, or you often need to use your knife like out in the cold or where moisture will get to it, this is not the knife for you. It's not. There's plenty of knives out there. If you're one of those people, you're already looking at different knives. You're probably not buying D2 knives. Let's just put that out there for real. So for most people that aren't in there, I mean, if you're one of those people, you're probably not even looking at this knife, and that's okay. There's lots of other great knives in things like MagnaCut 20CV and Vanix and all sorts of other things that can really work towards that source. And this isn't one of those knives. But that also means that its cost to value ratio is really good. $65, we're just going with that number, for what is essentially become the quintessential Chinese made quality Chinese made folder, where it's a D2 blade, a good solid I don't say traditional, but open style handle. There's not a lot of grooves, good for a lot of different hands, in a D2 that's been just hard enough to maintain edge retention without too many returns or any chips or anything like that. Good heat treat, great execution. I mean, it's high value. The thing that's going to matter, this is right up there with so many other knives that are right in this price range, including from places like Vosted and Bestech, Civivi. There's so many knives on there. It really becomes what you like. If you're going to ask me about which one's made better, they're all pretty close to great, right? They're all up there for the price. For just to bring, like, say, actually an even better one, I'll do the sheep's foot, like the Vosted Raccoon, right? Is one made better than the other? It's arguable, different steels and all that stuff, but as far as overall excellence of execution, they're both really good, right? Different features for different ones, but they're both really freaking good. It's really hard to sit and make a complaint about stuff that it's absolute nitpicky and very much a matter of personal preference. So on the cost to value ratio, yeah, it's up there. It's up there with anything. It's as good a cost to value ratio as most knives can get, right? It's in the 90 to 95 range. It's just a high value proposition. And these materials going together at these price range and the sheer volume of it lets us know that that's about the price we can expect for that level of quality, which just is where it's at. The market can't go much lower, right? So, that's good to know. It has a high cost to value ratio. I expected this to be good, right? I expected this to be good. I expect it to be high value. Why? Because I have other Bestech knives. And by that, I mean, I have had great experience with Bestech quality. So I have a high expectation. Do I have any requests? This might be the area where you often would hear me say, different steel or something like this, and you could have done an S35 yen or even a 154 cm, but it wouldn't change the value proposition on this whole much. Maybe the 154 cm or 14 C28N might work for somebody in one of those more humid environments that was discussed earlier, maybe. But, a higher end would take some of the cost of value off this. This is designed to be an easy knife to get into and get good performance at a high value. It would lose something if you tried to turn it into something more. If you try to turn this into a carbon fiber, S35VN knife, I wouldn't necessarily be as happy, or titanium or anything like that. It's already fairly heavy with what it has. So if anything, it needs more of a diet. So there's really not much to ask for. Could there be a little bit more room right here for your finger? Yeah, but that's not the way they designed it. It's obviously designed for a bit more room. Like, I have large in width and medium in length, and I still have plenty of finger room to spread my fingers before I run out of handle. That's pretty good. So there's really not much to ask for. I wouldn't want this necessarily in a higher end. It would lose some of its panache. It would lose some of what I think makes it great, and that's its value for the money. Because this really is, to recap here, the design is great. It's a little blocky and square, but it's easy to recognize and comfortable for many hands, right? It looks good. It looks like a utility knife. It looks like a knife that's there to do some work, not necessarily hack up people, even though you can do snap cuts pretty nice with the sheep's foot. The mechanics of it are right up there with any of the Chinese-made crossbar locks from the major manufacturers. They've dialed in their tuning, right? It has a little bit of bounce, but you can time it pretty nicely. Does all the flicks. It has a nice heavy blade, so the action is very drop shot. It's very guillotine-like with all that blade out there. Fairly thick blade, extremely thin behind the edge, which may be the noteworthy point to really put in there. Like, hey, this is really slicey. And its intended purpose as a budget-friendly EDC knife is also what makes it such a great cost-to-value ratio. It is a budget-friendly EDC knife. It does that well. It does that extraordinarily well. Is it something you can recommend over others? No, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it under any others. If this is the kind of knife that appeals to you, you should buy it. It's extraordinarily well done. It is as good as it looks, if not better, right? It has all of the features you'd expect. Tiny little bit of cutting path with the thumb stud, just barely. But if you're at an angle with a saber grip, you're missing it anyway because the swedge is in front of it. So yeah, you don't really miss anything. It's as inexpensive as a good Chinese knife can get, with D2 steel and inset liners and all of the features. And there really isn't any, it lives up to high expectations and doesn't really make you feel like, gee, if only I had this in something better. There could be some stainless steel. There's an argument for that, but that's just a steel choice for a particular market. But it's not a bad knife. It's really hard to sit here and say, oh, this would be so much better if it was in better materials. It wouldn't necessarily. It wouldn't necessarily be that much better. So it's actually a really good knife. And that's one that I don't hear very often. Like, I actually want to put this for its cost of value at the 89 to 90 range as far as its value. Does it have any one thing that stands out? It might to you, but no, generally it doesn't. But that's just it. It's just a lot of really good parts that don't do anything fancy, but do everything well. And that's a good thing in my book. It doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't call out a lot of attention. It just goes to work and does what it's supposed to do really well. And that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing when it comes to knives. All right. And just to let you guys know, I am trying to keep these reviews under 30 minutes going forward, trying to get it down to the 20-something minute mark as we move forward in here. So I'm going to be, and since I don't do editing, that means I'm going to try and shorten these. And I think we've gone through it. You know, in the damn nice categories, it does really well. It's in the 89 to 90 range. And it's just a really good knife. If the design speaks to you, there's nothing wrong with this design. Or the knife itself. My example being using it as an example for all of them. Bestech has done an extraordinary job of making a budget-friendly knife that does easy tasks extraordinarily well. And that makes it highly recommendable for people who are looking for that kind of knife. It's really hard to complain. You know, it is a little bit large. Be aware that it's fairly large and heavy, but it's also a heavy-duty knife that can work. So that's really good, and it doesn't have a lot of break-in issues, which again is really good. So for a really good knife that doesn't seem to have any really expounding virtues except that it's just generally a good knife. If this was a person where you're just like, yeah, there's nothing wrong with that dude. He just does everything well. He's not extraordinary. He's like a B student, but he's a B at everything. He just does everything well. That's actually a good thing. Maybe as long as we're continuing that metaphor, maybe they are not flashy, but they do everything they need to do really well. There's a couple things maybe it doesn't do, but you know that up front. There's no hiding it. It's completely up front and communicated. And what it does do well is also upfront community. You can take one look at this knife, know what it's about, and realize that they did a good job, and that's exactly what this knife does well. And that's highly recommendable. I'm going to leave it there. The Bestech Slasher in D2. This particular example in the blue denim canvas micarta, or blue denim micarta D2 coated blade. Highly recommendable. 89 to 90 on the 0 to 100 scale. So go ahead, everyone, take this video, watch it twice. Comment as much as you like. Be mindful of side effects. Remember to like and subscribe. This has been your Dose of Drew. I am said Drew, and you guys have a great rest of your night.